Good evening. For any major mechanized expedition to be a success, you need two things: an outstanding leader and an engineering genius. The Citroen Trans-African Expedition of 1924 had been a success for these precise reasons. And by 1930, the same team had almost completed preparations for an even greater undertaking, again under the same man. For 12 years, André Citroen had been working on a vast program of worldwide development by automobile. And he'd had specially designed and built for the job a Citroen half-track weighing 4 tons, powered by a 40-horsepower engine. Theoretically, this machine could traverse almost any kind of terrain, and it would have to if the expedition were to be a success. Because the Citroen Trans-Asia Expedition planned to link the Mediterranean with the China Sea by a pincer movement closing midway on Kashgar. One party would set out from Beirut, across Syria, Iraq, across what was then called Persia, through Afghanistan, and skirting the Himalayas and Pamirs, would rendezvous at Kashgar, coming from the west. And the other party, setting out from Pekin, would go through Mongolia, across the Gobi Desert, and would rendezvous at Kashgar, coming from the east. The whole expedition was most carefully planned and superbly, one could almost say lavishly photographed, as these excerpts from the French film clearly show.
The 14th of April, 1931. The Syrians watched with wonder as these modern travelers, only just arrived from France, set out on the road to Baghdad. At night, camp beneath the ruins of an old oasis and 3 more hours' work for the mechanics. The most important part of the day for the wireless operators as they set up their aerials and waited anxiously to hear from our brothers of the China Expedition. All is well. They have left Peking and the Great Wall. Their leader, Victor Point, signs off. Our plan can still succeed. Victor, with the China group, will lead west across Mongolia and the Great Gobi Desert, while we drive east across Afghanistan and the Pamirs, our 2 parties meeting at Kashgar. But already there are plenty of problems, for we have reached Srinagar, and Srinagar is flooded.
We've just heard from Simla that Victor Point and all the members of the expedition are detained at Urumqi.
Le vice-roi vient d'envoyer un télégramme disant que Victor Point.
So Victor Point and the Chinese group are in trouble. and so are we.
And besides, with the floods that we've got here on the Geelum, these are accompanied by very, very heavy falls of snow at Bogged.
L'inondation que nous avons à ce moment-ci correspond à des chutes de neige très importantes sur le col du Bourgzil.
Yes, and it's practically impossible to go on foot, and therefore it would be quite impossible in cars.
After 3.5 months' travel, the play which unfolded in front of us was no oriental fairy tale. It was a single realistic question. How were we going to cross the Himalayas? We decided to follow the Gilgit Road, a mule track that is closed for 8 months of the year and climbs over a 13,000-foot pass. We must go on, for the eyes of the world are following the progress of this caravan across this oldest trade route on Earth. Here we met the highest peaks and passes on Earth, never before climbed by motor vehicles. In places, the track was only 1 meter 30 centimeters wide, and the vehicle was 1 meter 40 centimeters. The twin tracks made the vehicles very maneuverable, and they could be levered round on the narrow ledges. But our mottos were still, we will get through, and sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. There was no turning back now, and we were aware of this, though our difficulties were many, and the slopes so steep as often to be 1 in 2. The wooden bridges were so rotten, nobody knew if the first or the last across ran the greatest risk. Two kilometers further on, the convoy faced much worse danger. What am I sitting on? Asked the driver. Oh, thin air, mon vieux, replied the leader. It was a miracle of balance that the 2-ton vehicle had not fallen, and it took 5 hours to maneuver it back onto solid ground. Where the rivers were shallow enough, the cars forded them. Where there were mountains, the cars followed the tracks. But at last, on the 26th of July, 1931, we came to a mountain where there was no track. The 2 cars had to be reduced to skeletons, no man's load weighing more than 30 kilos. This way, the cars could be carried piece by piece along the narrow ledge to the track on the other side. It had been agreed to double the porters' salaries to 2 rupees a day for this work. Soon, a long line was stretched out, carrying over 50 bits and pieces of machinery under the burning sun. The danger was to keep their balance across the broken rock that marked the path of the avalanche. The job had started at 6 in the morning. Now, at 6 at night, it was completed and the cars could be rebuilt. Once reassembled, it would take 18 hours to cover the next 5 miles. At last, we reached a poor village to the chant of the Quran. Our cameraman, although attacked by dysentery, went on working, wanting to cover all the angles, image by image, so that travelers of the future would remember this hellish journey. Each night, the radio telegraphist listened in, trying to catch a message from the China party. But though he listened far into the night, no word came through. The China group were not talking. It was now the beginning of August, some 4 months since we had first set out so proudly across the sands of Syria. But now there was no sand, and we were no longer quite so proud. Our upward path was over the Borzil Pass in the Himalayan mountains. The height, nearly 14,000 feet, higher than any such man-made machine had ever been forced. The snow had to be probed at each step for crevasses. The men fought for breath. The petrol did not vaporize properly in the cold, and the engines lost power. It was a cruel climb. Towards midday, the snow melted and torrents formed. The shallow ones were easy to cross, but always we worried, what if the ice bed of the stream should break? It was a country which broke the heart and made us wonder about the futility of mountaineering by automobile. Yet, in the end, our animosity against the mountains gave way to admiration of their grandeur, and in the end, they let us pass. So, on the 4th of August 1931, we entered the Himalayan town of Gilgit to wild excitement and curiosity, for no one here had ever seen an automobile before. Gilgit marked the halfway point of our journey to China, but not of our troubles. For we should have joined up with the Citroen China Group in another 800 kilometers. But now, we heard they had been caught up in the Chinese Civil War and were being held virtual prisoners another 1,600 kilometers away at Urumqi. If we went on by car, most likely our vehicles would be impounded too. Sadly, we left our two Citroens at Gilgit and went on horseback like the travelers of old, following the caravan routes. We went to the local king for help and horses to try and cross the 1,500 kilometers that still separated us from our colleagues of the other half of the expedition. Somehow, the steep slopes of the Karakoram must be climbed. But after 1,200 hours of non-stop struggling with our machines, we were weary, and the horses not swift in that terrible terrain. At 4,000 meters, life went quietly on in the Pamirs. Seed time and harvest, a time to sow and a time to reap. Here the mountain tribes lived as they had always done. The messengers from outside spoke of a crisis that was not connected with their harvest. He had brought a letter from the China group held at Urumqi, and we had to make all the speed we could to reach them that our primitive transport and the terrible terrain would allow. But on the 1st of September 1931, amidst all our problems, we had an achievement to celebrate. We had reached the highest point of our journey, 5,200 meters. A historic photograph was taken, and the first arrival of the French at this altitude was formally celebrated. The expedition had now reached the Asiatic side of the Himalayas, and the people and the customs changed accordingly. The Kyrgyz are the nomads of the high plateau. Their tents are made out of the long hairs of the yak, woven and rolled together to form a fabric to shelter all the family, and which all the family were to weave. The Citroen West column was pushing east from Gilgit when they heard the China group were being allowed to set out to meet them. And the full reunion took place at Urumqi, courtesy of the Chinese. Despite all the polite smiles, the China Citroen group had really been helpless pawns in the Chinese Civil War. Their powerful radios, vital communication links for whoever could control them. But now the vital safe conduct had been negotiated in return for 2 Citroën vehicles and the promise that these French gentlemen are asked not to create incidents or carry forbidden goods. And it was also understood that for the future, filming would be forbidden. So, in what they call the 50th year of the Republic, the governor and people escorted us out of town on our 5,000-kilometer journey to Peking. Everywhere on our journey, we came upon the same thing, the rule of the gun and delays. Our leader made out a tariff of delays: 1 month for a marshal, 10 days for a general, 5 days for a colonel, and bribes and praise for the new soldiers and their prowess. Once again, the leaders of these men said our passports were invalid. But a pair of prismatic binoculars opened the negotiations, and 2 boxes of grease eased them along. Then a gift of 2 carbines and 2 Mausers re-stamped our passports. Who were the soldiers guarding the town against? Others as greedy as themselves? Or wealthy merchants who would trade no more? Rich farmers who had reaped their last harvest? Compared with this, we preferred the bitter cold of the Gobi Desert in December, even fording the frozen Yellow River with the temperature 33 degrees below zero. The engines were nearly worn out. All the spare parts had mysteriously vanished. The mechanics often worked all night in the bitter cold, repairing breakdown after breakdown, not noticing Christmas had come and gone. With sunrise came the wind, blowing from the south and obscuring everything. A dense dust seeped into the cars. But at last, the Mongolian plateau lay behind us, and the gateway led down towards the Chinese coast. Pillars sculpted in the form of beasts led us on the last 18 kilometers of our journey to Peking. Perhaps these stone creatures guard the tombs of the Ming emperors who once ruled all China with such grandeur. We had crossed China, the land of rivers and mountains, of deserts and plains. Now at last, we were in Peking. The images merged and mixed and crisscrossed in our minds. This day, the 12th of February 1932, we enter Peking, just 350 days since we set out from Beirut. After traveling nearly 13,000 kilometers, we have forged a link between the Mediterranean and the China Sea. The French consul congratulates us. In following in the footsteps of Marco Polo and in bringing the name of your country to the heart of ancient Asia, your indomitable spirit reflects glory on you and your motherland at the end of this great and heroic journey.